We tend to think of persuasion as a natural gift, a charismatic knack for getting people to say yes. Behavioral psychologists view it entirely differently. In empirical terms, compliance is simply a predictable set of input-output responses. Human decision-making operates on a framework of heuristics, and researchers have identified that our choices are reliably modified by 6 distinct psychological triggers. Those triggers are reciprocity, scarcity, authority, commitment, liking, and social proof. To study these triggers, scientists observe social environments and isolate independent variables, allowing them to measure exact percentage shifts in how often people comply with a request. The data shows that persuasion can be accurately modeled and replicated by anyone, purely by applying the correct variable. Laboratory experiments isolate these variables cleanly, but they often fail to capture the full friction of daily life. Verifying these principles requires double-blind testing in the real world. Researchers use natural environments, like hotels and restaurants, to establish a baseline rate of compliance before introducing any experimental changes. By altering a single word on a sign or modifying a minor physical action, they inject an independent variable into the environment and record the measurable deviations from that baseline. These minor linguistic or physical adjustments consistently yield massive, statistically significant increases in the desired behavior. Consider this field research on resource conservation conducted by psychologist Robert Cialdini. The text details a specific test of the social proof principle inside hotel bathrooms. The dependent variable in this study was straightforward: the percentage rate of guests who chose to reuse their towels. This split screen illustrates the setup. On the left is the control condition, the standard card asking guests to reuse towels to save the planet, relying entirely on environmental altruism. On the right is the variable condition. Researchers used a simple, factual statement indicating that the majority of previous guests reused their towels. The outcome was definitive. The variable group exhibited a 26% higher compliance rate than the control group. This data defines the mechanics of social proof. When individuals are unsure of how to act, their decisions are heavily dictated by the perceived actions of their peer group. Social conformity forces a stronger compliance response than an appeal to logic or environmental altruism. The exact delivery method of a variable can scale compliance nonlinearly. We see this in David Strometz's restaurant experiment, outlined here, which tracks how minor server favors impact gratuity. The zero-variance control group is established at the start of this timeline, diners who receive their bill with no after-dinner chocolates. Variable 1 introduced the chocolates in a bulk heap alongside the bill. This resulted in a marginal 3% increase in the tip. Variable 2 changed the delivery method. The server dropped the chocolates individually in front of each diner. Gratuities rose by 14%. But variable 3 isolated the true trigger. The server distributes one chocolate individually, walks away, and then unexpectedly doubles back to offer a second unit. Tips increased by 23%. The psychological mechanism at work is obligation. Subjects feel compelled to return favors when the initial gesture appears highly spontaneous and personalized. Reciprocity is calculated by the perceived individualized intent of the giver, not the monetary value of the gift itself. The remaining heuristics operate with similar precision. First is the principle of scarcity. Compliance increasing significantly when the subject perceives the resource, opportunity, or product as restricted in time or quantity. Commercial advertising exploits this exact limitation by enforcing limit per customer policies to accelerate purchasing decisions. Next is the principle of authority. In a medical study, therapists struggled with patient exercise compliance. Once the therapist prominently displayed their medical qualifications on the wall, patient adherence experienced an immediate, measurable leap. Visual demonstrations of constraints or expertise function as cognitive shortcuts, reducing a subject's need to critically evaluate a request before complying. The fifth trigger is commitment and consistency. Securing an initial minor affirmative response, like a verbal agreement to a hypothetical question, drastically increases the statistical probability that the subject will comply with a formal, larger request later. And finally, the sixth principle is liking. Paragraph I details a postal survey study where researchers manipulated the return names printed on the forms to match the subjects. If the recipient was named Cynthia, the sender name was listed as Cindy. This phonetic similarity in nomenclature doubled the mathematical rate of survey completion. Minor, seemingly irrational associative links can double a subject's willingness to comply. Effective persuasion operates entirely independently of inherent charm. It relies on verifiable mechanics. Human cognitive processing is forced to rely on these predictable heuristics simply to manage the overwhelming volume of daily decision-making. The conscious application of reciprocity, scarcity, authority, commitment, liking, and social proof acts as a direct input-output mechanism. By utilizing these empirical behavioral models, any individual can alter the statistical outcome of human compliance. This video is brought to you by the IELTS FOCUS Zalo 084-770-5973, an English center specializing in IELTS preparation.